Hey y'all, so today I'm going to be doing a wrap up for my 2017 BookTubeAthon. Before I jump into the video, I did make a compilation vlog throughout the week, so I will leave that linked up in the cards if you have yet to see that. During the BookTubeAthon, I managed to read 7 books. 3 of them were novels and 4 were manga. Also, I didn't really focus on the challenges too much throughout the week, so I'm not going to focus on the challenges very much in this video. Essentially, I completed all of the challenges except for the one to read a book outside, which I said in my TBR, which will be linked up in the cards. I said in my TBR I wasn't planning on doing that one anyway, so oh well. So I'm gonna go ahead and run through the books in the order that I read them. So I made my TBR video, and then when I went to start reading for the BookTubeAthon, I basically scrapped it. I think I only read 2 books throughout the week that were actually on my BookTubeAthon TBR. I have said many times I've been in a reading slump all year, and I just decided that I wanted to read the books that I wanted to read. And so that's basically what I did, and they just ended up becoming books that actually fit into the challenges. It was partially planned, partially not, but either way, these are the books that I read. The first book that I read during the BookTubeAthon was If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. I finished the book One of Us is Lying by Karen M. McManus literally a few hours before the BookTubeAthon started, and that is a murder mystery set in high school, and that kind of made me realize that I was in either a dark contemporary or murder mystery mood, and that I was really in the mood to read something that either took place at a boarding school or at a college, and that's why I started with this book. If We Were Villains opens on our main character Oliver on the day that he is released from prison. The officer who put him behind bars and who he still regularly communicates with is retiring from the police force and is insatiably curious about what actually happened, and so Oliver is about to tell him his story. The main plot of this story centers around Oliver and his small group of friends who are all seniors at this small college, and they are all Shakespearean actors. The book follows this group of friends throughout the school year, both before, during, and after this crime, and while it is a little bit of a whodunit, it's more of a character study following these 7 people and the dynamics between them. And I absolutely fell in love with this book. I got obsessed with it. I could not put it down. I just was so engrossed in this, and like I said, I completely fell in love with it. The way I kind of described it is endearingly pretentious. When I first started the book, I thought that the main character was extremely pretentious because he was quoting Shakespeare, and I was like, who does this dude think that he is? But when it started into the main plot with all of these Shakespearean actors, it came off as more endearing than pretentious, but it was still kind of a little bit pretentious. I think part of the reason that I really fell in love with this is because I can kind of relate to it. I went to a small school for college, and my graduating class of music students was only 12 people. Obviously there were music minors and several other majors within the college, but there was this very small group of us that were not all tight-knit, but there were several very tight-knit groups within that larger group. Like the students in this book, we were all really close with our professors, and we would actually like hang out with our professors. So that aspect of it really tied me to this group of people who were not studying music, but were studying an art form, and were very close with their professors and very close with each other. And although I loved the whodunit aspect of it, like I said, I honestly didn't really think about the whodunit aspect of it too much because I was too intrigued by these relationships between these characters, and it was just a really fascinating read. I also really enjoyed the writing style, and like I usually say, I don't pay too much attention to the writing style unless I really enjoy it or really dislike it, so that's always a good thing when I notice the writing style in a good way. Overall, completely in love with this book, probably the best one that I've read all year, and complete 10 out of 10, 5 out of 5 stars. This is one of my new favorite standalones. Next up, I read the first volume of the Devil's Line manga series. At the beginning of this volume, our main character is attacked by a vampire, or what is called a devil in this series, and the person who saves her is a half-human, half-devil who works for this like underground police force that deals with devil-related crimes. And the story goes from there, following this girl who's just been saved from a devil attack and this guy who's on this police force, and the relationship that begins to develop between them. Unfortunately, though I had a glowing review of the last book that I read, this was my least favorite book that I read this week. I didn't think that this was terrible, I just didn't particularly enjoy it. I gave it 2 out of 5, probably a high 2 out of 5, so like 5.5 out of 10. It was Honestly, it reminded me a little bit too much of Twilight. Apart from the fact that there were just vampires, there were other things that reminded me of Twilight, and there was an insta-love aspect that I didn't really enjoy. I didn't find the plot super compelling. I didn't dislike it, but I just didn't find it that interesting. But the things that bothered me more about this were some of the more technical aspects. I found the speech bubbles sometimes really hard to follow. They weren't always placed in close proximity to the character that was speaking, but rather the tail would just point toward them, and sometimes that was clear and sometimes it was really vague. Sometimes I had to reread sections just to tell who exactly was speaking, or there would be a flashback and I couldn't quite tell who the flashback was supposed to be attached to. And if I were a brand new manga reader, I would consider this my bad, I don't know what I'm reading, but I've read my fair share of manga at this point and I've never had issues like this. In fact, I read 3 other manga volumes this week and I didn't have issues reading any of them, but this one was a little confusing to try to read. Also, the character reactions were sometimes really weird because not that they would overreact, but they would have a really big reaction and then the next panel they'd be totally back to normal. Like, they'd freak out and then be calm. Like, it was just really disjointed and weird. So overall, I just generally disliked this and I'm not going to be continuing the series. And this was also my book that I picked up at the library as a book that I picked solely because of the cover, and I think this perfectly exemplifies why I don't pick books just based on the cover. The next book that I read was 13 Reasons Why by J. Asher. This was a reread for me. The first time I read this was back in like 2009, I think. I read it in high school. I've reread it several times. It's been a long-standing favorite standalone for me. However, when this new Netflix series came out, this book and the series were both criticized a lot for many different reasons, for being problematic, for the way that it dealt with suicide, and since it had been a long time since I reread this, I wanted to reread this and then take a look at the criticisms to see how I felt about the book now, because the last time I reread it was like 2012. I'm planning on doing a full blog post about this because I feel like that's the best way to accurately word my thoughts about this, but I will talk about my overall opinions. I want to start this out by saying that I have personally never dealt with depression or suicidal thoughts. I'm a pretty emotionally stagnant person. I get more emotional about books and movies and TV than I do about my actual life. I just haven't dealt with any of the extreme emotions that our main character, Hannah, has dealt with in this book. So just wanted to put that out there and say that before I jump into this. So after rereading this, I don't have the same love for it that I had after the first several times reading it back when I was in high school. For me, this is still a book that I personally get something emotional out of. I really am always struck by the weight of the emotions, especially as the book moves on. And like I said, it's something that I always have been really affected by. And I still felt that way on this reread. I felt the emotions compounding more and more on themselves as all of these events began to stack up in Hannah's life. However, I can absolutely understand the criticisms about this book and how it glamorizes suicide and how it doesn't even mention the word depression, which just really struck me this read through, and it's something that I never noticed in my first several read throughs. I'm never going to be someone that says that Hannah's reasons were too petty and something like that, because if you are pushed to that point, your reasons are not petty. But given the way that this book deals with suicide and the many things that I've read, I can't, in my own conscience, recommend this book to other people, even though I personally get something out of it when I read it. So for me personally, I've demoted this to a 4-star read. Like I said, I get something out of this. It didn't have the same impact this time that it did in the past, but I still really connected to it. But like I said, I can't responsibly recommend this to people when I know that it can definitely have negative effects on people, especially people dealing with depression or suicidal thoughts. Those are my overall thoughts on this. I definitely, like I said, plan to do a blog post where I talk about this a little bit more in depth, but those are my thoughts after this read through. Definitely a lot more muddled and confused than I thought that they would be. The next 2 books that I read in the BookTubeAthon were from the same series, and those are volumes 1 and 2 of the Battle Royale manga series. I read Battle Royale by Koushun Takami back in May, and it was amazing and I loved it, and so I've been collecting the manga series and finally jumped into it. And I think that so far, this is a really awesome adaptation. If you're unfamiliar with the premise, essentially this is kind of like the Hunger Games, but it did it first and it's better. Like I said in other videos, I'm not saying that the Hunger Games copied this, but the premise is pretty similar. This is a dystopian set in a country where every year there's something called the program that takes place. Every year a class of 9th graders is chosen to compete in the program, which, like I said, is kind of like the Hunger Games. It's basically an isolated battle of survival where they're going to have to kill each other one by one until only one person is left standing. The thing that I absolutely love about this book and series versus the Hunger Games is that it allows us to get inside the heads of pretty much every single character who's competing in the program. And like I said, so far I think that this series is a really great manga adaptation of the book. The artwork is really cool, also really gory, so if you're a bit squeamish, maybe shy away from this, but it's just so epic so far. There are minor changes here and there, but nothing big or that actually bothered me. The only minor complaint that I had is that at the beginning of the book, it really focuses a little bit on a lot of the characters, like little character traits about like half of this class of 42 people, whereas at the beginning of volume 1 of the manga, it kind of focuses in on a few people rather than spreading it out across everyone. So I thought that that was a little bit, not clumsily done, but I think that it was better in the book. But otherwise, this is really, really good so far. Definitely going to be continuing on in this series very, very soon. I gave both of these volumes 4 out of 5. This one was a little bit better, but not by much. I'd say that they're both around the 9 or 8.5 out of 10 mark. Next up, I read A Great and Terrible Beauty by Libba Bray. This is the first in the Gemma Doyle trilogy, and as you can assume from that name, it follows our main character, Gemma Doyle, and it takes place in the 19th century. Gemma has grown up in India, but when tragedy strikes her family, she moves back to England where the rest of her family is, and she gets enrolled in this girls' boarding school. But there's some kind of mysterious stuff going on because right before leaving India, Gemma started to experience visions, and there's this very mysterious guy who followed her from India to England and is trying to contact her about these visions. I absolutely love the Diviner series by Libba Bray. Book 3 comes out in October and I'm so excited, and I was really, really intrigued to get into this series as well. And so far, it is not disappointing. I really, really enjoyed this first book. As I mentioned earlier in the video, I've been in a mood for something dark that takes place at either a boarding school or college, and this fit the bill, which is why I picked it up. Usually I'm not a big historical fiction person, but the exception seems to be Libba Bray's books because they're paranormal and historical fiction and really, really good. The mysterious stuff going on is really intriguing and the plot is really interesting, but honestly, the absolute best part about this book is our main character, Gemma. Gemma has a big personality and she's really opinionated, and she's not going to keep quiet about anything she has an opinion on. She's such a strong female lead, and I really, really enjoy that, especially in a book that takes place in the 19th century. I loved Gemma as a character. Add on to that this really intriguing and mysterious story and these very interesting paranormal abilities, and I'm hooked. I want to move on to book 2 as soon as possible. I just really, really enjoyed this book. If this series keeps on going as it is, Libba Bray will probably be up there as one of my favorite authors. I gave this 4 out of 5 or 9 out of 10. Definitely a really, really great start to the series. And the 7th and final book that I read during the BookTubeAthon is the first volume of the Vampire Knight manga series. When I went to the library to pick out a book to fulfill the book you picked just because of the cover challenge, I ended up grabbing the first few volumes of a few different series, and this was one of the other series that I grabbed. The Devil's Line cover was the one that stood out a little bit more to me, so I went with that one, but this one was still intriguing me, so I decided to go ahead and pick it up. This manga takes place at a boarding school where there are day students and night students. The thing that the day students don't know is that all of the night students are vampires. Our main character Yuki was saved from a vampire attack when she was a child, and she's been adopted by the headmaster at the school. Yuki and her fellow student Zero are basically like more aggressive hall monitors. Their job is to keep the day students and the night students separate for obvious reasons, and some chaos ensues. Overall, I thought this was a pretty interesting first volume to this series. I gave it 3 stars out of 5, so I liked it, but I wasn't like overly impressed with it or anything. It was intriguing enough that I plan on continuing the series, at least tentatively, but not intriguing enough for it to get bumped up to a 4-star read. I'm not completely sold on the series, but I am definitely intrigued, especially by the characters, which was my favorite part of the series. So, like I said, I will be continuing on to the next couple volumes. I don't know if I'm going to read the whole series, but we'll see after I read those few volumes. I do want to very quickly address a couple books that I started during the BookTubeAthon and ended up putting down. I listened to about 16% of the Illuminate audiobook. Basically, I was not super intrigued by the story. I think that I would enjoy it more reading it in physical form, so that's what I'm going to try to do next time I pick it up. It's still something that I am intrigued by, and I think I will find it more compelling when I have like the different case studies and different things like that in front of me rather than in my ears. But I do plan to pick it up again sometime in the future. Whereas the other book that I picked up and didn't finish was Playlist for the Dead. This is one that I wasn't really compelled by when I picked it up. I didn't get really drawn into it. I did read only 30 pages, but still, I wasn't super compelled to read more. And when I looked on Goodreads, I realized that it had a much lower rating on Goodreads than I thought it did. Typically, I kind of avoid books that have less than 3.5 stars. This is mostly because I tend to be a kind of critical reader, and if the general consensus is that the most common rating for this book is 3 stars, I can only imagine how underwhelmed I will be by it. So I think that for now, given that I wasn't super compelled by the first 30 pages, and since that rating is pretty low, I think I'm going to set it down and probably not pick it up. Maybe in the future that'll change. It's one that I've been interested in for a while, but at this point I've kind of lost all interest. So these are all the books that I read during the BookTubeAthon. I think I had a pretty successful BookTubeAthon, even though I didn't read a book outside. This is the most that I've read in quite a while. I haven't been reading much this year, and so this is a nice stack of books to read in a single week. Also, I just did a new post on my blog that I hope to become a series where every month I list the top 10 songs that I couldn't get out of my head over that month or that I had on repeat all month. And so I will leave a link down to that in the description because this month's music was really, really awesome. I loved it. I had it on repeat constantly. I've been listening to a lot more music than usual, so definitely check down in the description for a link to that post. So that is it for my BookTubeAthon wrap-up. As always, I will leave links down in the description to my blog, Twitter, and Goodreads. Please add me as a friend on Goodreads. I would love to be friends with all of you. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!